have your mic, so
Everyone.
have a good table ronde. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ainhoa. Yes, please, my notes, I need them. Okay, so good afternoon to everyone in the room. Good afternoon again to you five around the world, around the globe. My name is Isabelle Schmidten, as Ainhoa already said. I am working at the Information and Documentation Center on Women and Gender here in Luxembourg. I have the pleasure to moderate this roundtable one day before International Women's Rights Day and one day before the second National Women's Strike in Luxembourg. So this event is the perfect occasion to reflect again on why women are fighting for their rights and for gender equality around the globe. In Luxembourg, as in many Western countries, we often think that feminism is a Western invention of the 19th century. And even if we still haven't reached gender equality, we think that it must be far worse in the global south. When I talk to people in Luxembourg about the necessity of the feminist movement in our country, I quite often hear the sentence, "But we don't have problems with women's rights here. Have a look at Africa, there they have problems with such things." So I don't know for our speakers if in some of your countries you hear similar things. We will talk about it later. From the post-colonial theory, we've learned that this is a very supremacist and racist concept, which is not true at all. So first we have to acknowledge that many African nations didn't have the notion of inferiority of women before colonization. So one could say the North brought gender equality to the gender inequality to the South. And second, we must acknowledge that today in the post-colonial era, some countries from the global South have outdated countries from the global North when it comes to gender equality. That is why I'm very happy to be here today with the 5 women from 4 different continents. And I am keen on learning from your feminisms and to hopefully break some stereotypes and prejudices. So let me introduce the speakers of our discussion round. First we have Angie Coronero from Argentina. Angie is an animator and a cartoonist. She was born in Salta, a small and conservative town in the north of Argentina. Since 2009, she has been working on animation projects for kids and on independent animation and comic projects. She's also interested in serial graphic arts, such as screen printing and stencil, and its application in political activism, such as defending LGBTIQ, women, and migrant rights. She currently lives in Buenos Aires. So bienvenido, Angie. Then we have Hasti. She's a doctoral student in Germany. She grew up in Iran, and now she analyzes women images in the Persian painting from a religious and feminist perspective, and she observes the influence of women's depictions on the society and culture of Iran. She always had an artistic soul and wanted to become a musician, but faced much discrimination, mostly because of her gender. Through her work, she found a way to art in an academic and more theoretical way. So welcome, Hasti.
Thank you.
Then we have Louise Mutabasi. She was born in France and studied theater and creative writing in Lyon and Paris. She is now living in Kigali, Rwanda since 2018, where she also works as an author and producer. She is also the producer of the performance play Learning Feminism from Rwanda, which you'll be seeing tonight at 6 p.m. Welcome, Louise. Then we have Areola Shaka from Albania. Ola holds a bachelor in social work and a master in human rights and democracy in Southeast Europe, as well as a master in gender and women's studies. She did trainings in gender issues and human rights, democracy and good governance. She has been working in civil society for around 20 years with different vulnerable groups, whereby the gender perspective and gender equality have been either the focus or the final achievement of any intervention, program, or project. Welcome, Ola, to you too. And then we still have Lisa Steph. Lisa was born in Kassel, Germany, and studied cultural studies and aesthetic practice in Hildesheim, Lüneburg, and Aix-en-Provence. Today she lives in Switzerland, I think for 2 years now, if I remember well. Okay. She's an actor and a performer, working on numerous different productions. Lisa is also the artistic director and performer of Learning Feminism from Rwanda by Flynn Works, and we will see her in action at 6 p.m. So let's get started then. The title of our event is called Feminism Around the Globe. But there's no such thing as one feminism. Of course, there is one common idea of feminisms, the one of gender equality, of the same rights for all. But then, besides, there are many aspects and different perspectives. There is queer feminism, black feminism, indigenous feminism, Islamic feminism, liberal feminism, and many more. Often different currents exist inside the same country, and often feminists don't use a specific works to describe their own feminism. But since it's the title of our event, and since we are from so different countries, I guess it's very interesting to see what every one of you understands by it. So I would like to ask you what your definition of feminism is. That doesn't have to be theoretical at all. Just tell us what the word feminism means for you personally and what for you are its major key aspects. And I would like Lisa to answer it first if you want.
Yes, thanks so much, Isabelle. It's a real pleasure to be here and to meet all of you. Feminism for me is definitely the fight for equality. I think, as you said, gender equality from my female perspective is definitely important, but for me, feminism also includes the fight against any structural discrimination, be it based on gender or origin or skin color or sexual orientation. So I would eventually love to live in a world where we are firstly treated as human beings instead of being categorized by one certain aspect of ourselves. So it's a fight for equality and equal chances for me.
Thank you very much. I then would like to ask Angie the same question.
Hi everyone. Thank you for the invitation. I'm very honored to be a part of this roundtable. For me, feminism is a political space where women, lesbians, trans people, migrants, queer people, and all the people who are segregated by the capitalist and patriarchal system find a shelter. It's also a way of living, a group of ideas and ideals that we embrace and we use to survive in the first place, to resist and to fight the exploitation and abuse of machismo. When I say ideas and ideals, I mean, as Lisa said, equality, cooperativism, socialism, pacifism, ecology, anti-biologicism, anti-especism, etc. So that's it.
Okay, thank you very much. Louise, what does it mean for you?
For me, feminism is, as you said, a fight for equal rights for everyone. And my feminism is inclusive. As a mixed person, I am always confronted with racism either ways, even if it's not a violent one, it exists and it's still another discrimination. So I believe that feminism has to be inclusive and it has to tackle problems from a cross-reading point of view. I mean, you cannot fight for women's rights if you don't fight for Black people's rights, and you cannot fight for women's rights if you don't fight for transgender people's rights. For me, it's really everything is important, and we cannot tackle only one problem, but we have to look at all the spectrum, the entire spectrum of the problem. And as I really liked Angie's definition, because it also includes societal and economic fight, which I really embrace as well. And the ecologic part is very important for me as well.
Thank you very much. There are already parallels. That's a good sign, I guess. So I would then like to ask Areola. Ola, what does feminism mean for you?
Yeah, thank you for this space and for giving us voice, to you and Fraen and the organizers. For me, I'm quite new when it comes to feminism because of my background, my history, country's history. And this is a question, to be honest, that I'm asking a lot lately to myself, because my work and my personal endeavors and my professional as well lead to feminism, but I've been detaching myself from the phenomenon or from the category of feminism, not finding myself anywhere represented. And in the late experiences, especially in the last years, my conclusion is that mostly of what Angie and Lisa and Louise said, that it's most of all about inclusiveness, without labels. It's a safe space. It's a safe space when you are supposed to feel free to appear weak, and also to be strong, to appear weak and to ask for help when it's needed, to be supported. It is a space which should allow education without limits and without categories. It's safety net. It's freedom to be who you are, and of course, parallelly, it's also fight for achieving all this, and a very good relationship with environment. I'm very animal pro person. I also fight for animals' rights. So the introduction of the environment and animals and whatever that it is in nature is also important for human development and positive achievements.
Thank you very much. And then I would like to ask the question to Hasti. What does feminism mean for you?
Yes. Also, thank you for the organization and inviting us. As other participants said, for me, feminism is also category under human rights, and also it means actually for me it is the most important thing is the equality and the equal possibilities and opportunities for everyone, no matter men, women, religious, non-religious. So it also contains LGBTQ rights, and it means also anti-racism. So I don't think I have another definition as other participants here. So it means for me the most important thing is equal opportunities for every human being. Yeah.
Thank you very much. So after talking about feminism, but we will stick with it, of course, I want to talk a bit about gender equality, the situation of gender equality in your respective countries. So there are different indices to measure gender equality, and the position of the countries depends a lot on what is measured and which indicators are stressed most. So Luxembourg, for instance, has a very good position when it comes to the gender pay gap, but it has a very bad one when it comes to the gender gap in political representation. So there is at least one common point for all the countries in the world. No country has reached gender equality. At least that's what says the Global Gender Gap Report. So I would now like to ask you, and perhaps this time we start with Angie, for Argentina. What seem to be the biggest gender equalities in your country, at least from your perspective? So perhaps that's important to stress at the beginning of these questions for Lisa, but also Louise and also Hasti. They are one woman can never represent one whole country. I think we all know that for sure, and many of us don't live just in one country their whole life. So you are the best examples that one can change the place where you live, and sometimes that's even a good thing to compare what the situation is. So we will keep this in mind when you answer the questions. So. Yeah, sorry, Angie, now you have the word.
Okay. Well, I think in Argentina it's quite the opposite in Luxembourg. We have a not too bad gap in political representation. We have not a significant gap in education, but we do have a bad gender pay gaps. For example, in the Congress, we have 38% and 42% representation, which is not too bad. Meanwhile, in salaries, even though we don't have a significant gap in education, we have a gap that goes from 22% to 33% in salaries. We have a higher rate of unemployment and subemployment. And from the total people who do the housework, of course, 73% are women. So I think our bad gap is the economic one. We are not too bad in the political representation.
That's very interesting. Thank you very much. Louise, I don't know, do you want to answer the question for Rwanda, at least what is your impression? And perhaps since you have lived for so long time in France, perhaps you can compare a little bit what your impressions are.
Yes, thank you. So for Rwanda, as you will see in the play later, we talk a lot about political representation, because Rwanda is really an example for this. A quota has been set in every political body in the country, which leads us to have 61% of women in parliament now, which is huge. And so I think this is the main accomplished, I think this is an accomplishment for the country towards gender equality in the political area. But I would say that the care work is the worst one here, because of course women are the ones in charge of taking care of the family and the housework. And even if economically and in the employment area, there are many opportunities given to girls and women, I mean also in education, they still have to do the house and the care work at home. And it also brings a lot of inequality in terms of how you live your life if you have double work to do. I would say I cannot really draw a comparison with France, but I mean, I think in France, the worst maybe, and I'm not really sure, but maybe the salary gap, which is kind of awful, and especially in the theater scene, where and in the artistic scene in general, where women in museums are very few, women in director of theaters or national centers for arts are very few, and it's a very slow process in France, from what I observe. Even if change is happening slowly, it's very slow and it's taking long.
Thank you very much. Very interesting. Hasti, I would like to ask you now. What is your impression for what are the biggest inequalities in Iran? And perhaps if you want also to compare to what you see in Germany, then please feel free to do so.
Okay, thank you. It is a bit difficult talking about the Iranian society. It's a patriarchal and sexist society with gender segregation. And as a woman, you encounter discrimination every day. The biggest inequalities are, for example, that the women are the second citizens and count as half of men, actually, as the law says. They, for example, they get half of the inheritance of what the men gets. There are many discriminations in sports and jobs. For example, the law allow a man to kill his daughter if she, for example, out of many different reasons. For example, if she sleeps with a man, child marriage. The girls like they changed the age from 9 to 13. This is what they did in the society, in the government. But still, you can see out of poverty that child marriage is still to be seen in the society. And another discrimination is that even though people can use internet and social media, which is a very good and positive improvement in the society, but still the government can arrest people because of the private things. For example, if a girl dance and record a video and put it in social media, and they arrest her. So these things are also very often to be seen in the society. And another thing, that the women still can't be judged, for example. They are not allowed to be judged. Women need men's permission to leave the country, or when they get married, they need the permission of the husband on the paper, if they are allowed to study, if they are allowed to work, and if they want to leave the country or to go to holidays, for example. They always need the permission of the husband. I think there are many things that we can discuss in Iran. As I said, it is very complicated. And the freedom of speech, there is no freedom of speech. And they get arrested because of if they don't accept their religion, if they have another religion, or they get discriminated. For example, they are not allowed to enter school or university if they have other religion. But as a positive movement, I cannot say that they achieved something. These movements achieved something. They can vote, for example, which I think in the middle of the 20th century, women were allowed to vote. But the most positive, I don't know if you also asked the equality, what they achieved. Was that also the question?
Not yet, but I think it goes together. Yes, the biggest gender inequality, okay. But it's what is also good. So yes, of course,
Okay.
the new
Yeah,
right to vote is a good example.
Okay, the most important and positive thing in the society of Iran is that people are informed. Also through internet, they can post everything that happens there on the internet, and they can make it international, and they can be seen. And people themselves and women themselves are getting to know their own rights, and this is the most important thing. Even if the government don't allow them, or the law is still suppressive law and discriminative law, but the most important thing and positive thing that I see is that they get informed, and it is a positive way, I see. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I would then ask Lisa. Lisa, you are living in Switzerland since 2 years. So Switzerland is not far away from Luxembourg, but I know that there are some things not so fine at all with gender equality, even if it's a very rich country. Perhaps you can tell us a bit about Switzerland.
Yeah. It's quite interesting because it's always attributed, or sometimes it attributes themselves with gender equality. I think one of the very stunning facts is that this year Switzerland is celebrating / criticizing. There's an anniversary of 50 years of women being allowed to vote. So only in 1971, Swiss women actually gained the right to vote, which I found quite shocking, to be honest. I think what's really positive is the access to education. I think it's even, more girls entering higher education and university levels and getting a degree from university. But then if you kind of look further, who's actually, who's a professor, who's working in the academics, then suddenly there's this huge gap. So I think, 73% men and 27% women or something like that. What's also always considered to be a great achievement is that women participate in the employment. So many women have jobs, I think more than 80%, which is, I think, also among Europe, a really high number and a good achievement. But what's usually overlooked is that most of these women only work part-time, because there's a really complex system in place that women are actually discouraged to go back to work after they have children. I think this is especially important to me because I basically became a feminist when I became a mother, because suddenly I felt like, okay, wow, now I see how this is working. Now I see there's this kind of, you feel like you're being punished for having a child. In Switzerland, it's one thing is that childcare is super expensive. It's really hardly affordable to have your child looked after, especially from like 1 to 3. And then when they go to kindergarten a bit later, when they're 4, the kids come home at 11:30. That's it. There's no system of, the children being at a daycare place or something like that. So that's one aspect. There's another aspect, which is tax. In Switzerland, if you're married, the person with the lower income, which is usually the woman, will be, like the tax will be super high. So there's this equation that women do once they've had a child. They think, okay, so if I'm going to work part-time, I'm going to make this much money. Okay, there's so much tax going away. Wow. And the rest of the money is really, I'm spending on childcare. So why should I go and work? And I mean, it's a little bit crooked thinking, because why is it the woman that would have to pay for the childcare? Why is it not subtracted by the income of the man? But just to show you, yes, they have access to employment, but really it's usually part-time. And I feel it living here, people expect you as a mother to be at home with your child until it's 3. If you give your child to kita more than a day or 2 days, then it's really like, okay, wow, interesting. And coming from Germany, I was used to, everyone has the right to have childcare from when your child is 1. You have the legal right to claim a place in kita, which is, of course, 5 days a week. So, So this whole care sector issue, and I don't only mean the distribution of unpaid labor between men and women, which is quite incredible. I think it's the gender care gap is 57% in Switzerland, meaning, you know, a woman does 57% more of the work than a man does. But it's also the care sector, the paid, especially women, mostly migrant women working in the care sector for a very low wage, insecure jobs, is a big, I see it as a big problem. Yes.
Thank you very much, Lisa. So what is missing is Albania. Areola, would you explain us what is your perspective?
Yeah, it's hearing my fellow women. It's all everywhere. It seems complicated to give a proper explanation. Albania, even though it's a small country, we have different categories, like starting from a geographical point of view, from economic, social, cultural, religious, and every specific group in itself has problems, and then the wider society in relationship with the state as well. But what I've seen, heard from the previous speakers as well, apparently the representation in decision making and in the government is, beside Iran, it's kind of the same. It was a surprise for me that we are like the double of the European countries when it comes to ministerial participation of women. We have a lot of women in the parliament and in the process of decision making. But it lacks a lot in accomplishment, in the respect of social and economic rights. And this representation at this point, I wonder if it is real when it comes to their representation in the government and decision-making processes. The presence of so many women is not working, and this representation is not real, because the situation of women on the other side, when it comes to working conditions, to working women's rights, to payment, equal opportunities, education, these are still very, very far away goals to achieve, to accomplish. So this represents really, I was wondering now that listening the previous speakers, that this representation, is it really an achievement? Because these women, and actually in Albania, the women that are involved in politics and in the government, they, at least perceived from outside, that is a very, I would say, very sick environment to work. It's emotionally abusive. We have a very nice and specific prime minister who is a misogynist, he is a sexist, he is very arrogant, he is visually, verbally abusive, and it's very probable that he's emotionally, and I don't want to say it, but probably physically abusive as well. So these women are working in this environment, they are talking in theory about feminism and women's rights, and they are speaking up about Albania being represented by so many women, but when it comes to actual facts, nothing is done. Another problem here is the informal work. There are so many women who work, but they are not registered because we had a positive number of employment of women here, but based on the registration in the taxes offices, there are so many women who work in black. Yes, it's in English, it says it's informal, in the informal sector. So they are not insured, they are not protected by law, they are prone to all sorts of abuse, coming also from a patriarchal, very patriarchal society, religiously patriarchal society. We, as women in general, we don't know how to express our voice. And we assume, we accept abuse as the norm. We accept violence as the norm. And actually we have a funny saying that I've used as well in my childhood without understanding what I was saying, that the one who kicks you, the one who hurts you, is the one who loves you the most. So this is the perpetuation of violence, of a mentality of violence that is being the norm through the years. We also have, I heard about child marriage, and here is also a problem. It's huge, especially within the Roma community and the poor families with low economic incomes. Even though the school system and the education system is free until the second level, the infrastructure does not give the possibility to all the girls everywhere in the country to follow school. For many of them, it's not safe. For many of them, it's expensive. They have to work. It's impossible mentally that they have to work, and they have to learn how to be good mothers and how to be obedient and good wives. So on paper, here everything is wonderful. We have gathered everything that is good from whatever comes from outside, also because we are daring to become member states. So the willingness of the government, at least in theory is high in creating at least the legal framework for protecting the women's rights generally, and in specific cases, being trafficked, victims of traffic, domestic abuse, all sorts of problematics that relate to women. But when it comes to practice, there are still many things to be achieved, and it feels sometimes that we are going through a regress more than a progress.
Thank you very much. You said something, very important, because I talked about indices, but it's still paper, and it's not always representative of what is going on really behind. Another thing you already said, yes, all the indices have trouble measuring and showing the intersectional inequalities linked to the big diversity of women inside the country, because there is a big diversity. So, for instance, it is already much harder for women to be hired for leader positions, and it can even be harder for Black women, for queer women, or for migrant women to be hired for these jobs. What would you say? And I ask you directly again, Ola, because you already talked about the women working in the informal working sector. What would you say, which groups of women are the most vulnerable in your country, perhaps besides the women working in these kind of sectors?
I wanted also to add, because I missed it before, which was mentioned even before, the unpaid work that women do with caretaking, and especially during the pandemic, this is becoming even more problematic, heavier, because also, for example, in Albania, most of the families, the bride goes to the husband's house, and she doesn't care only for the husband and the children, but she cares also for the parents-in-law, and sometimes brothers or sisters-in-law, or children of other relationships within the family. So the unpaid work inside the family is a big problem here, as it is in many other countries. And this, I think, if I could make from the worst to the least, I think the Roma and Egyptian community is the one that is most affected by this situation. They have no voice. Many of them are not educated. Many of them don't speak Albanian. They cannot follow school, and if you don't speak the language, you don't know what's your right and what is your responsibility. I don't think there are public services, educational services for the Roma community in their language, like schools. For sure, there are private initiatives. Then another problematic group is the Lgbt community, but I would particularly mention the transgender women. That is, I have a personal experience working with sex workers. And this is what they at the very end, even if they try a lot, even if they are educated, even they have possibilities, the final work that they can do is sex work in order to get incomes, because they are not accepted anywhere else. They are perceived as weirdos that are not the norm, that should be outcast from any aspect of everyday life. Then, of course, disabled women, women living in rural areas under the poverty level, and another category that I think lately is being more and more facing more and more problems are older ages. As I mentioned earlier, we used to leave children who take care of their families. Here, children don't leave the house at 18. They stay in the house, they get married, the wife comes in the house of the husband or the other way around, which is very rare. So we take care of each other generation after generation. In the last decades, immigration is a problem. And there are many families with older people being alone. And there are cases, I have one neighbor of mine here where I live, she died, and because she was alone, she died and no one knew she was dead for over a week. And people just, not hearing from her, just remember that, well, there's someone here and we'll go and check. And for sure, there are many cases not reported like this, because the way that we work as a society, the way that we work as a society is not the case anymore. And it is very difficult for this generation to adapt. They cannot leave Albania and go and live with their children wherever they are, and they are all around Europe and outside Europe. Emotionally, physically, healthy, from a health perspective, they are very, very vulnerable groups.
Thank you very much. I would then like to ask Hasti, how do you see it, or how do you saw it in Iran? Is there intersectional discrimination, and which women would you say are the most vulnerable ones?
Of course, there are. Before I get to the question, I wanted to ask you for permission to add something to the last question, if it's okay.
Of course.
Okay, great. Because I forgot something, or better to say, I heard some opinions and I remembered something. In the Iranian society, women now we see that women go to the universities more than men. Even like I think more than around 60% women go to the universities. But when they get out, I think it was Lisa talking about it. When they get out, you don't see that they have the equal job possibilities as men. And another thing which I wanted to add that they changed in the law is stoning of women. Also, when there was a law that women had to be stoned if they slept with a man other than their husbands, but they don't execute it anymore. So I think that was so cruel, and it was so cruel for the whole world internationally, so that they stopped executing that. But as a solution, I think change of law, of course, as Ola also said, it is not the law which says if something in the society happens or not. It doesn't matter if they change the child marriage, the age from 9 to 13. It doesn't mean that it doesn't happen anymore, but the most important thing that is that you change the law, and it is a long, very, very long process through many years to create a culture, to improve the culture. And to the last question, this is also a very, very difficult question, because in the society where people still fight for their basic needs, for human rights, not only feminism, not only women's rights, but for freedom of speech. This question is very hard to answer. Of course, the situation for the women in the capital and in Tehran is much better than in other cities. But of course, if we talk about intersectional feminism or LGBTQ, there is no statistic. You cannot, the LGBTQ, they don't have a public life. So, and there is no statistic to talk about them. I think there are so much pressure on them. Of course, it makes it much harder for them. And also for the migrants. We see the migrants from Afghanistan, and racism is very high. And if you are a migrant woman, of course, I can understand, I can imagine that it's much harder. Discrimination because of the language, because of the racism, or the religion, as I said. I can imagine that these makes it much harder for migrants, or or even the compulsory hijab. I don't mention also. If you're a woman and you are also discriminated by your gender, and you have to have compulsory hijab, and then you are a migrant from Afghanistan, of course, or you are a lesbian, which you can't have a public life. Of course, I can imagine that is much harder. But as I said, there is no statistic. We don't hear anything about them. Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm now very curious on knowing the answer of Louise, because Louise, you already said that yes, you are experiencing intersectional discrimination as a Black woman. So, what is it? Yeah, how is the situation in Rwanda? What is your impression?
I will also add a few words to the previous answer that I gave, because as Ola said, it's not because you have 61% women in parliament that they are feminists, or that they are heard, because the numbers are just numbers, and they are not hired on their opinions. I mean, it's also, the quota is also creating this. This is about the previous answer I gave, and about the most vulnerable group in Rwanda. I would say there is a huge difference between a woman living in Kigali, the capital city, or a woman living in the countryside in Rwanda. The situations are extremely different, and the daily acts, tiny acts of violence you have to face in the countryside are much higher. And yeah, this is I think the most vulnerable group would be uneducated women living in the countryside in Rwanda, because they most likely are working in agriculture field, and but the situation of how they can live, depending on the infrastructure they have, is so hard that the work that you have to do plus your usual work is really super important. I'm giving examples. Maybe it will make it clearer. If you live in the countryside where you don't have running water and electricity, so you have to cook with using wood. You have to fetch the wood. You have to fetch the water, and the next place where you can fetch water might be a few kilometers away, and you do that twice a day, and you have to work, and you have to take care of your children and of your maybe animals if you have them, or whatever other course things you have to do. So I think the most vulnerable group is, of course, those women. I'm also thinking of LGBTQ people, of course, because the law is not against them here, but it's hard to make the situation visible of how people live. And so not so many people are caring about them, and they are facing a lot of discrimination as everywhere. But I think that there is a taboo and there is an unspoken situation about them, which make them very, very vulnerable, because to get some help, it will be just a headache. Many people that I know are just trying to find ways to go in another country because they cannot really stay here, because they are not safe in so many ways. And yeah, just to emphasize a bit about the situation, the different situation in Kigali and in the countryside, there is also this big group of house workers that people who have enough income can hire in cities and in Kigali especially. And those people are mostly women. They are underpaid and they are not really, they're also in the informal work. So they don't have a contract, they don't have insurance or whatever. And some of them are migrants as well, coming from neighbors countries. And those are, I mean, yeah, so these are the three groups I would point out as vulnerable in Rwanda.
Thank you very much. Lisa, comparing to Switzerland, because we now heard several times the difference between women in the big cities and women on the countryside. I don't know would you say there's such a difference in Switzerland too? I had to think about the right to vote, because I think in Appenzell they were the last women of the country, and it has been in the 90s, if I remember well. So perhaps there's a difference too, but you will tell us.
Yeah, so the cantons are all quite small, so there are more conservative ones and less conservative ones. Yes, exactly as you said, Appenzell Innerrhoden until 1991, the men weren't willing to give up, to share the power with the women, but they were overruled by the state eventually. What I also found very interesting looking at, how the progress was made, that in 1968, Switzerland wanted to sign the European Convention on Human Rights. And 68 was before women were allowed to vote in Switzerland. So they were going to sign it, but with just this little amendment, taking the political rights of women out of the equation. So they basically wanted to say, yes, we are pro-human rights, but women are just not allowed to vote. So, what you all said, yes, what's on paper and the numbers we see and the indices might be far away from reality sometimes. I mean, in Switzerland, I think in 1981, since 1981, in the constitution, it says men and women are treated equal. This is quite a while ago, and we all know this hasn't happened yet, even though it's the law, it's in the constitution. And in Switzerland, it's really, I don't know if it's especially slow. It feels especially slow, the development. And whenever there's a women's strike, you can always see the symbol of the snail, because it's taking such a long time. So for example, there's, what is it in English? I think it's called something like Motherhood Insurance. When you have a baby until you go back to work. I'm not quite sure if the English term is correct, but I think you know what I mean. So this was discussed politically.
Do you mean the maternity leave? The money you get for, okay.
Exactly, and here it's called insurance because it also secures, they can't, and during that time while you're at home with the baby, they can't, sack you from your job. They have to keep the job for you, etc. So this was first discussed in 1900. And it took Switzerland until 2005 to put it as a right for women to stay at home when they have the baby and to get 80% of the money. So the snail is really a symbol that's kind of stuck in my head when talking about Switzerland. But to come back to your question, I think probably the most vulnerable group is the migrant women as well. It's a little bit different than in Rwanda, but yes, they work in the care sector. There's many women coming from other countries working in low-paid jobs, caring for the old people in Switzerland, caring for the children, caring for the sick, and really keeping the system going, especially and even more so, of course, during the pandemic. And if they're single mothers, I think the problem is so much more intensified because of the expense of childcare, because of getting a permit to stay in Switzerland or seeking asylum is incredibly, insanely hard. When you get a permit, it's a very short-term permit, so you have to go back again and again and again and prove that you are that you can stay and live in this country. The only thing that you can do to really stay is marry a Swiss person, of course. That helps. So yes, I think I would probably say single mothers of migrant origin, possibly of the global south, because there's a huge bias against the global south. I always feel Swiss politics, they have a scapegoat, which is called migration. Many things that are going wrong in Switzerland, they are blamed on migration. And it's so interesting because there was a study that actually migration in Switzerland helped the process of gender equality once. You know, there's many Italians came to work in the factories because the Swiss needed women for their workforce. And when the Italian women came, the Swiss government realized, okay, we have to start childcare so they can actually have their children looked after while they work in our factories. So that's how a process started. So the connection of immigration and gender is quite interesting, but the bias is always, okay, migration is bad, we don't want that, they have to stay out. But actually they're keeping the system running.
Remembers me a bit of Luxembourg. Not everything you said, but migrant women, absolutely. Yeah. Thank you very much, Lisa. Angie, for this round, I think you already said some things in your introduction about feminism, but perhaps you can stress again, yes, for the intersectional question, what are the most vulnerable women in Argentina?
Yes, well, I think in Argentina, the most vulnerable women are lower class women, most of them being migrants and racialized women. They don't have basic needs covered. Most of them are mothers and they usually have many children. So they are very, very exposed to exploitation and abuse. And in the capital, in the small towns and in the country, they live in a very precarious way. Other very, very vulnerable group, as Areola said, in Albania, are trans women. Even though we have a law for trans work quota, they are not hired for any job apart from sexual work. They are frequent victims of all kinds of violence. They cannot access to a health system, or they won't go to the hospital because they are mistreated. They can't pay for surgeries, so usually they have breast prostheses made of plain oil. Their life expectancy is under 40 years old. And in addition to that, in Argentina and in Latin America, trans women are often also racialized or migrant women. So it's, I think they are really the most vulnerable, but also, lower class and migrant women.
Thank you very much. Okay, so when I have a look at the time, I'm very sorry that I will perhaps not ask my next question because I want to give the opportunity to our public here if they have a specific question to one of the speakers. Now would be a good moment to ask it. We also have a microphone so that the speakers are able to hear you. I see one there. I think it's not working. Wait a moment, perhaps. Not yet. Oui, la technique a besoin de quelques secondes. Or you ask it, and I will repeat it. Repeat it. So, some of you were talking about the environment and the link between feminism and environment. And she wants to ask how ecofeminism is developed in your country, if it is very present or not. I don't know who wants to perhaps take the question. I think Angie was talking about the environment, but there were also others, so I don't know who wants to take it. Thank you for the question.
Well, in Argentina, the ecofeminism is it's kind of new, but it's very present in many areas, animal rights, and also fighting extractivism. I don't know if that's the word in English. So especially in young feminism, women from 18 to 25-year-olds are very, very active in ambientalism, and they fight in the high leagues against mines and animal exploitation, etc. So, it's quite present, the ecology in the movement. I don't know if I answered the question.
Yes, she nods.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Is there another question from the audience? Yes, I see a hand.
Okay. Hello. Okay. You can hear me? Yeah. Yes. Well, my question is about feminism. Some people are a little bit confused when we are talking about radical feminism, liberal feminism. What do you think about all the kind of influence or some, I can say, women saying that I'm radical feminism? What can you talk about the kind of influence or movement?
So, if the radical feminism has a negative influence on the movement, I don't know. Does someone of you have an opinion?
Maybe I would say something,
Hola,
but maybe others can also add something.
Hasti, sorry, I didn't hear.
Yeah, this is interesting because this is very important where where are you talking about this terminology? In which context? In which country? From which perspective? Because I was attending a seminar about feminism, and this was very interesting for me that there was a feminist who talked about the differences and was introducing the differences in the society of Germany, the protests because of the regals in the supermarket are so high that women protested against it because they couldn't reach the products which were so high. And for example, that the room temperature in the supermarkets are based on the men bodies, or for example, the protest against the new iPhone smartphone, which is based on the size of the man hand. And I see this. This is good to see the differences. This is good to see that a society has improved so much that they can see differences. But this is also important to see where to put the focus, because for me, from my perspective, which I compared it to my society, to the Iranian society, this was like, I thought, I can't even think about these things, you know. There are much bigger problems. This is important to put where to put the focus. If you compare the women's rights in a country like Iran, and to see which feminist movements are being placed here, then I think this is not a good comparison. So of course, if it's getting too far, you can say maybe this ruins the goal behind the feminism. But this is also important how you define the terminology, the term feminism. That was my answer. But as I said, I found it interesting. Maybe someone has another idea.
Thank you very much. I see that there are Louise and first Areola want to respond also. I would just ask you to keep it very short so that we still can talk 5 minutes about the play. Ola, you can start.
Yeah, this is a very good question actually, because and also relates to my answer at the beginning. I come from a society where feminism was a foreigner show, was outcast during communism. To talk about feminism, you would risk even to go to prison or to go to a concentration camp, because it was a value that belonged to the Western society, that was the enemy. So I was raised in this environment. Then when I was a teenager in the 90s and until the 2010, there was a lot of political chaos, and feminism was not the first thing in the agenda of the civil society, of the government, or whatever. So at this moment, I come in front of all these forms of feminism without a legacy of feminism in my childhood, during my childhood, my own personal experience. I didn't have a mother. I don't have a mother who had a story to tell me how she felt. During communism, she had all her most important rights fulfilled by the state. So this is why I don't see myself as the feminist, as the person who asked. He didn't say the name. Because of these categories, so many categories that not all women can find themselves represented. If I can share a personal experience that also made me change my opinion and my feelings towards feminism. Do I have time now, or?
Yes.
I had the possibility last year to be part of this training about self-defense. I was very skeptical, as in everything that involved feminism. I've always been a little bit questioning and wondering if it is the right thing to do. And it was a very good choice for me that I took. I embraced. It is, and I'm going to quote. I read a post on Facebook, which says that empowerment through self-defense, which is this technique that is taught to women to protect themselves, not only physically, but also mentally. Physical, psychological, emotional reinforcement, empowerment of their being and of the way of their main strength, improvement of their skills to protect themselves. And empowerment through self-defense is a feminist movement because it is an integrated approach where not only physical techniques are being taught, but also individuals are being taught about social justice and made aware of gender-based discrimination and systematic oppression. Feminism aims to overcome all biases that negatively affect all women and girls, and empowerment self-defense works for the same purpose, creating a society with no social injustice, especially gender-based violence. And this is the form of feminism, the example of feminism that I am happy to, and I would be happy to embrace. And it feels like this kind of approach is the door that kind of accepts all these colors. At least it gives a table to speak. And if I raise a question, I don't feel judged, and I don't feel secluded, and I don't feel excluded. Like it has happened for me in the interaction and in the learning process of feminism with other Western, especially Western feminists.
Thank you very much. Yeah, I think we are like coming back to the beginning where we said that there is not the one feminism. There are many feminisms, and you can be very happy with one form, but not identify at all with another form. That's for sure. So I want to ask perhaps Louise and Lisa, or one of you both, or both. So we are now almost at the end, and in some minutes we'll start the performance Learning Feminism from Rwanda. And perhaps you can just tell us a little bit about how this production came to life.
Should I start, Louise, and then you go?
Yeah.
It started about 2018. I read a book by a Swiss author, and she was basically praising exactly those political representation numbers in Rwanda. And at first I couldn't really believe it, and I thought, oh wow, this little country in East Africa, how did they do this? How did they, within a very short period of time, within 25 years, change so radically in a way towards gender equality? So we went and did some research over the course of 2 years, and then we found a team in Kigali, and Louise is one of the team. She's actually the one who saw most of this production, but I'll tell you later why. So we found a team in Kigali, and they were supposed to. We went there for a period of rehearsals, a team from Germany, and we met the team in Kigali. And then, of course, COVID happened, and we knew, okay, the next period of rehearsals is not going to happen, at least not live, because nobody was allowed to travel. So what you will be seeing in the show, you will see 3 Rwandan performers on video, because those 3 couldn't travel. So we basically devised and rehearsed and shot these videos via Zoom, which was the hardest thing I think we all ever did up to now in our work lives. And there's another Rwandan performer with me on stage who luckily lived in Europe, who lives in Paris, so she was able to come. It was a very intense time, I would say. Over the course of 2 years, Louise actually saw both sides, and that's why we were so grateful to have her. She was in Kigali for the first rehearsals. She was in Kigali when the videos were shot, but then she was able to come to Berlin when we had the live rehearsals and when we actually had the show. So she was our dramaturg. Louise, maybe you want to talk about the crazy.
I don't know what to add, because now it sounds like a very good resume. But yeah, it was very hectic to rethink how we are used to work together. And for example, I was first hired by Flinworks as a costume designer assistant, because Tatiana Koch, who is the costume designer, the main one, she wanted to know, to meet with different designers here in Kigali and to see how to find her ways. So I was helping her with that first. And this job of costume design, you cannot do it if you're not physically present with the performers. So we had to devise the work, and to have many different people working on the costumes, with me being the intermediary between them and Tatiana. But she sent her drawings, she sent indications, and she just had to trust us to make it happen as she was thinking of it. So this is just an example to tell you how we really had to rethink and recreate how we usually work. And yeah, it's a bit crazy that it was possible, and that it was such that the final product is good, actually good, because during the process we could not envision how it would look like at the end. And it was really navigating without seeing anything from my side, at least. And yeah, I was very grateful to be able to travel to Germany. Thanks to my double nationality, I was allowed to. But it was a lot of responsibility as well, to be the only one who seen the entire process, and to I don't know, to bring what happened in Kigali, and what Lisa and Sofia only seen via Zoom, to bring the memory of all those live moments that I've lived, and to share it with the team when rehearsing in Germany. It was made me bear a lot of responsibility towards the artists who were not able to travel.
Thank you very much. So I already saw the performance. I can just encourage you all to stay and to see it. And if you can't, then to go and stream it via neimënster.lu. I now have to end this roundtable discussion. I am very thankful about the exchange with you 5 strong and very inspiring women too. I thank you for sharing your thoughts and feelings, and for being here and participating here today. I also want to thank the audience for investing their time and for listening. I hope you've got also new impressions and inspiration. Yes, I have so. I hope you too. And finally, I want to thank neimënster for organizing these feminist events, especially many thanks to Karine Bouton and Ainhoa Ashutegi. So I now wish you all a wonderful evening and a great feminist 8th of March, and now a good performance, and thank you to you all. I don't know if you hear the applause, but there is applause, so. And I hope to see you soon again. Bye-bye.